In the quiet village of St. Anne's Hollow, a lavish masquerade ball at Hollow Manor hides a deadly secret. When Lady Beatrice Serrano, a widow with a shadowy past, is found stabbed with a jeweled dagger under a crescent moon's shadow, the glittering guests, her brooding stepson, a cunning heiress, a desperate doctor, a fiery dancer, and a nervous solicitor become suspects. Only Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and unassuming charm, can unravel the web of blackmail, a hidden ledger, and a phantom's cryptic game to unmask a killer, before the truth vanishes into the night. Chapter 1. The Invitation to St. Anne's Hollow. In the gentle embrace of St. Anne's Hollow, where ivy clung to stone cottages, and the air carried the faint perfume of late summer roses, Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlour window, her knitting needles moving with the quiet rhythm of a metronome. The pale blue shawl in her lap grew steadily, its soft loops a testament to her patience and precision. Outside, the village stirred gently. The butcher's boy cycled past, whistling, and Mrs. Tuttle's spaniel yapped at a stray cat. It was a morning like any other save for the arrival of the post. Miss Marple's housekeeper Lily, a rosy-cheeked girl with a tendency to chatter, bustled in with a silver tray bearing a single envelope. "Ever so grand, miss," Lily said, her eyes wide. "It's got a proper seal, like something from a storybook." The envelope was indeed striking. Heavy cream paper, embossed with a silver mask, and addressed in a flowing script that suggested both wealth and intention. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles, her fingers tracing the wax seal, a curious design of a crescent moon pierced by a dagger, before opening it with care. The invitation was from Lady Beatrice Serrano, the enigmatic widow who had taken up residence at Hollow Manor 6 months prior. It announced a masquerade ball, themed the Phantom Masquerade of Madrid, to be held in 3 days' time at the manor. The promise of Spanish flamenco dancers, a string quartet, and a mysterious phantoms game intrigued Miss Marple, though she was not one for such extravagance. Lady Beatrice, a woman of indeterminate age, with a penchant for crimson silk and bold gestures, had already become a subject of fascination in St. Anne's Hollow. Her late husband, Don Carlos Serrano, was said to have amassed a fortune in Madrid through means both lucrative and shadowy, and his death had left whispers of scandal trailing his widow like a train. Miss Marple set the invitation on her lace-covered table, her mind already sifting through the village's gossip. She recalled a conversation at the Women's Institute, where Mrs. Harrow, the postmistress, had spoken of Lady Beatrice's foreign ways, and the crates of Spanish artifacts delivered to the manor. There was talk of a treasure, jewels perhaps, or gold, hidden by Don Carlos, though no one could say for certain that they. Villagers, with their knack for embellishment, wove tales of cursed riches and betrayed partners, but Miss Marple knew better than to take such stories at face value. Still, the invitation's grandeur suggested Lady Beatrice intended to make a statement, and statements, in Miss Marple's experience, often masked secrets. That afternoon she strolled to the vicarage, her black brogues crunching on the gravel path. The vicar's wife, Mrs. Eleanor Clement, was pruning her dahlias, her cheeks flushed from the September sun. "Jane, you've had the invitation, haven't you?" she called, waving a pair of shears. "The whole village is talking about it, a masquerade, in St. Anne's Hollow. It's like something out of a novel." Miss Marple smiled. settling onto a garden bench. "It does seem rather theatrical. What do we know of Lady Beatrice's guests?" Her tone was mild, but her eyes were sharp, catching the flicker of excitement in Mrs. Clement's face. "Oh, quite a mix," Mrs. Clement said, abandoning her pruning. "There's Raphael Serrano, her stepson, such a brooding young man, an artist, they say, but he's been at odds with Beatrice over money. Then there's Clara Mortimer, that heiress from London, all airs and graces, though I hear she's not as wealthy as she pretends. Dr. Hugo Vance will be there, of course, our own physician, though he's been looking peaky lately, hasn't he? And a Senorita Isabella Vega, a dancer from Madrid, very exotic, I'm told. Oh, and Mr. Leonard Price, a solicitor, though no one knows why he's been hovering about the manor." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking softly in her bag. She had met Dr. Vance at a village fete, noting his nervous habit of tugging at his cuffs, a sign, she suspected, of financial strain. Clara Mortimer's sharp tongue had made an impression at the church bazaar, where she dismissed the vicar's sermon as provincial. As for Raphael and Senorita Vega, their ties to Madrid hinted at a deeper connection to Don Carlos's past. Mr. Price, with his solicitor's reserve, was an enigma, but Miss Marple knew that quiet men often carried the weightiest secrets. "Lady Beatrice seems determined to stir the pot," Miss Marple remarked, her voice soft as the breeze. "A masquerade is a curious choice, don't you think? People hide behind masks, but their natures always slip through." Mrs. Clement laughed. "You make it sound positively sinister, Jane. It's just a party." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. "But in my experience, Eleanor, when people gather under false faces, they reveal more than they intend." As she walked home, the invitation tucked in her handbag, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the crescent moon and dagger seal. It was an odd choice, theatrical yet precise, like a clue waiting to be deciphered. She paused by the village green, where children played under the ancient oak and considered the nature of treasures. In St. Anne's Hollow, as in life, the true value of a thing was never in its glitter, but in what it drove people to do. Back in her parlour, she resumed her knitting, the blue shawl growing under her deft hands. The masquerade, she decided, would be worth attending. Not for the music or the spectacle, but for the chance to observe. For Miss Marple knew, as surely as she knew the pattern of her stitches, that where there was pomp and mystery, there was often mischief. And mischief in her quiet village had a way of turning deadly. Chapter 2. The Masquerade Begins. Hollow Manor stood resplendent under the amber glow of a September moon, its mullioned windows spilling light onto the Dukeist lawns of St. Anne's Hollow. Within, chandeliers sparkled like constellations, casting patterns across the polished oak floors, where guests swirled in a kaleidoscope of silk and velvet. The air thrummed with the plaintive strains of a Spanish guitar, accompanied by the sharp clap of a flamenco dancer's heels. It was a scene of opulence, yet Miss Jane Marple, seated unobtrusively in a velvet-upholstered chair near the ballroom's edge, sensed an undercurrent of unease. Her black silk dress, unadorned save for a delicate lace mask, allowed her to blend into the shadows, her knitting needles clicking softly in a tapestry bag at her side. Lady Beatrice Serrano presided over the evening with the grace of a duchess, her crimson gown shimmering as she moved through the crowd, a feathered mask accentuating her sharp cheekbones. Her voice, warm yet commanding, greeted each guest with practiced charm, though Miss Marple noted a flicker of calculation in her dark eyes. The village had whispered of Beatrice's past, her marriage to Don Carlos Serrano, a Madrid merchant whose wealth was as mysterious as his demise. And tonight's phantom masquerade of Madrid seemed designed to flaunt both her fortune and her enigma. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the other guests, each a study in contrasts. Raphael Serrano, Lady Beatrice's stepson, stood apart, his matador costume, black velvet with silver embroidery, lending him a Byronic air. His dark curls framed a face taut with resentment, and when Beatrice brushed past him, offering a saccharine smile, his hand tightened around a glass of sherry. Miss Marple recalled the village gossip. Raphael, an artist of modest talent, depended on his stepmother's largesse, a fact that clearly chafed. Nearby, Clara Mortimer, clad in a glittering emerald gown and a mask adorned with peacock feathers, laughed too loudly at her own jests. Her companion, Dr. Hugo Vance, in a plain domino mask and a slightly rumpled tailcoat, responded with nervous chuckles, his fingers fidgeting with a silver cigarette case. Miss Marple had seen such mannerisms before, in men who owed more than they could pay. Clara, rumoured to be a distant cousin of the Serranos, tossed her head, her eyes darting toward Beatrice with a mixture of envy and disdain. Señorita Isabella Vega, the flamenco dancer from Madrid, was a vision in black lace, her mask a filigree of silver that framed almond-shaped eyes. She moved with a predator's grace, her fan snapping open and shut as she glided through the crowd, her gaze lingering on Beatrice with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Miss Marple, ever observant, noted the dancer's elegance was tempered by a faint tremor in her hands, a sign, perhaps, of suppressed emotion. A latecomer drew Miss Marple's attention. Mr. Leonard Price, a solicitor with a pinched face and a drab domino mask that did little to conceal his discomfort. He clutched a leather satchel, its worn edges suggesting frequent use, and hovered near the refreshment table, declining offers of champagne. His presence puzzled Miss Marple. Solicitors rarely attended such affairs unless business lurked beneath the festivity. As the clock struck 11, Lady Beatrice clapped her hands, silencing the quartet. "My dear friends," she announced, her voice carrying a theatrical lilt, "tonight we honour the legend of Madrid's phantom masquerade. A masked figure will distribute tokens, envelopes containing riddles. One holds a clue to the Serrano treasure, a legacy of my late husband." The guests murmured, their curiosity piqued by the mention of Don Carlos's fabled wealth. Beatrice's smile widened, but Miss Marple detected a glint of mischief, as if the game were more than mere entertainment. The lights dimmed, and a figure emerged from the shadows. A tall silhouette cloaked in black, a silver mask gleaming under the chandelier's glow. The phantom moved silently, slipping envelopes into gloved hands. Miss Marple received hers, noting the same crescent moon and dagger seal as on her invitation. She opened it discreetly, revealing a slip of paper with a cryptic phrase, "The treasure lies where the shadow falls." Other guests whispered over their own riddles, their voices tinged with excitement or skepticism. Raphael tucked his envelope into his jacket with a scowl, while Clara waved hers like a trophy. Dr. Vance glanced at his and paled, shoving it into his pocket. Señorita Vega's fingers lingered on her envelope, her lips parting as if to speak, but she remained silent. Mr. Price, clutching his satchel, accepted his envelope with a curt nod, his eyes darting toward the conservatory doors. The music resumed, and the guests returned to their dances and intrigues. Miss Marple, however, remained seated, her needles pausing as she watched Beatrice slip through a side door toward the conservatory, her crimson gown a vivid slash against the darkened hallway. Moments later, Dr. Vance excused himself from Clara and stepped onto the terrace, his cigarette case glinting as he lit a match. Senorita Vega, too, vanished briefly, claiming a need to adjust her costume. Raphael lingered by the fireplace, sketching absently on a napkin, while Mr. Price retreated to a corner, his satchel now open, revealing a glimpse of papers. At 10 minutes to midnight, a piercing scream shattered the revelry. The music faltered, and the guests surged toward the conservatory, where glass doors stood ajar, admitting a cool night breeze. Miss Marple, rising with surprising agility, followed the crowd, her heart quickening not from fear, but from anticipation. In the conservatory, beneath the drooping fronds of an orange tree, Lady Beatrice lay crumpled, her crimson gown pooling like blood. A jewelled dagger, its hilt engraved with a crescent moon, protruded from her chest. Her feathered mask had fallen aside, revealing wide, unseeing eyes and a look of startled betrayal. The guests gasped, some stepping back, others pressing closer. Dr. Vance knelt briefly, his physician's instincts overcome by a visible tremor. Clara clutched her fan, her face ashen beneath her makeup. Raphael stared, his sketch forgotten, while Senorita Vega's fan snapped shut, her expression unreadable. Mr. Price, his satchel clutched to his chest, muttered something about calling the police. Miss Marple, standing at the edge of the circle, observed the scene with quiet intensity. The dagger, she noted, was from a display case in the Manor's hall, its blade both ornamental and deadly. Beatrice's envelope was nowhere to be seen, though a faint rustle in the orange tree's leaves suggested something had been disturbed. The moonlight cast a shadow from the tree onto the tiled floor, where a single tile bore a faint crescent moon design, almost invisible in the dim light. As the guests whispered and the air grew thick with shock, Miss Marple's mind turned to the phantom's game. "A treasure," she murmured, her needles resuming their rhythm, "is only as valuable as the secrets it hides, and secrets, I find, are rarely kind." Chapter 3. The Inspector's Arrival. The morning after the masquerade, Hollow Manor seemed to shrink under the weight of its own grandeur. Its chandeliers dimmed, and its velvet drapes drawn against the pale September light. In St. Anne's Hollow, the village stirred with whispers, as if the very hedgerows carried news of Lady Beatrice Serrano's murder. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a high-backed chair in the Manor's drawing-room, observed the gathered guests with her usual quiet acuity. Her knitting, a pale blue shawl, lay folded in her lap, her hands still but her eyes missing nothing. The air was heavy with the scent of lilies and suspicion, and the conservatory doors, now sealed by a constable's tape, loomed like a silent accusation. Inspector Ronald Craddock, a man of sturdy build and a perpetually furrowed brow, arrived from the county police with an air of brisk efficiency. His moustache twitched as he surveyed the scene, his notebook already open to a fresh page. Miss Marple knew Craddock from past cases. A diligent officer, prone to underestimating the elderly spinsters of quiet villages, yet open to reason when gently guided. He stood before the guests, his voice clipped as he addressed them. Lady Beatrice Serrano was murdered last night, stabbed with a dagger from this very house. I'll need statements from each of you, and I warn you, omissions will not serve you well. The guests, unmasked and subdued in the morning light, formed an uneasy tableau. Raphael Serrano, his matador costume replaced by a rumpled linen shirt, leaned against the mantelpiece, his dark eyes fixed on the floor. Clara Mortimer, her emerald gown exchanged for a severe grey dress, sat with her chin lifted, though her fingers twisted a lace handkerchief. Dr. Hugo Vance, his face sallow and his cuffs frayed, avoided Craddock's gaze, his hands clasped tightly. Senorita Isabella Vega, in a simple black dress, stood by the window, her fan absent, but her posture rigid with defiance. Mr. Leonard Price, the solicitor, clutched his leather satchel as if it were a lifeline, his pinched face glistening with perspiration. Craddock began with the facts. The jewelled dagger, an antique from a display case in the Manor's hall, had pierced Lady Beatrice's heart, causing instantaneous death. The conservatory, with its potted orange trees and tiled floor, showed no signs of a struggle, suggesting the killer had acted swiftly. The envelope Beatrice received during the Phantom's game was missing, though the other guests retained theirs. Miss Marple, her own envelope tucked in her handbag, recalled its cryptic message, "The treasure lies where the shadow falls," and wondered if Beatrice's had held a more dangerous secret. Raphael was questioned first. "I was in the library," he said, his voice low and bitter, "sketching. I didn't care for her games or her guests." When pressed about his strained relationship with his stepmother, he shrugged. "She controlled my father's money. I didn't kill her for it, but I won't pretend I'm grieving." His candour was disarming, yet Miss Marple noted the faint smudge of charcoal on his fingers, suggesting he had indeed been drawing. Though whether in the library she could not say. Clara Mortimer's account was less steady. "I was dancing with Dr. Vance," she declared, her voice sharp. "We were in the ballroom all evening." But when Craddock asked for specifics, her eyes flickered. "Well, perhaps we stepped apart for a moment. I needed air." Dr. Vance, when called upon, confirmed the dance, but admitted to leaving the ballroom briefly. "I went to the terrace," he said, his voice unsteady. "Just for a cigarette. I saw no one." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. She had seen Vance's cigarette case gleam in the moonlight, but the terrace was perilously close to the conservatory. Senorita Vega's response was cool, almost detached. "I was in the guest room, adjusting my costume," she said, her accent lending a musical quality to her words. "The lace was torn." No one could confirm her whereabouts, and her dark eyes met Craddock's with a challenge. Miss Marple noted the dancer's hands, now still, bore no trace of lace threads, a curious detail for one so precise in her craft. Mr. Price, sweating under Craddock's scrutiny, claimed he was in the study, reviewing documents. "Lady Beatrice had asked me to verify some papers," he stammered, clutching his satchel. "Legal matters, you understand." When asked to produce the documents, he hesitated, then opened the satchel to reveal a few innocuous contracts. Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught the absence of the bulging papers she had glimpsed the previous night, and she wondered what Price had hidden or discarded. As Craddock moved to inspect the conservatory, Miss Marple followed, her step light but purposeful. The orange tree under which Beatrice had fallen cast a dappled shadow on the tiled floor, and Miss Marple's gaze lingered on a single tile, its faint crescent moon design nearly invisible in the daylight. She bent slightly, as if adjusting her shawl, and noted a scuff mark near the tile, as if something had been dragged across it. Craddock, focused on the dagger's display case, dismissed the tile as fanciful nonsense, but Miss Marple tucked the observation away, her mind turning to the Phantom's game. Back in the drawing room, she overheard Clara whispering to Dr. Vance, her voice low but urgent. "You didn't tell him about the letter, did you?" Vance shook his head, his face pale. Miss Marple's needles, now in her hands, clicked softly, a rhythm that steadied her thoughts. The letter, she presumed, was the envelope from the Phantom's game, but Clara's tone suggested more than a mere riddle. As the guests dispersed, Craddock confided in Miss Marple, his tone grudgingly respectful. "A messy business, Miss Marple. This treasure nonsense is a distraction, but I'll wager the motive's simpler, money or revenge." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Perhaps, Inspector, but in my experience, distractions are often the key to the truth. People hide what they fear most." She returned to her cottage that afternoon, the village abuzz with speculation. At the Blue Boar Inn, she learned from Mrs. Baxter, the innkeeper, that a stable boy had seen a cloaked figure near the manor's gates just before midnight, a detail Craddock had yet to uncover. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her thoughts circling the crescent moon tile, the missing envelope, and the cloaked phantom. "People are careless," she murmured to herself, "but objects have a way of speaking for them." Chapter 4. Shadows of the Past. The afternoon sun slanted through the lace curtains of the Blue Boar Inn, casting delicate patterns on the worn oak tables where villagers gathered to dissect the tragedy at Hollow Manor. Miss Jane Marple, ensconced in a corner booth with a pot of Earl Grey and a plate of scones, listened more than she spoke, her presence as unassuming as a forgotten teapot cosy. The inn, the heart of St. Anne's Hollow's gossip mill, buzzed with speculation about Lady Beatrice Serrano's untimely end. Mrs. Baxter, the innkeeper's wife, a stout woman with a voice like a foghorn, leaned over the counter, regaling a cluster of farmers with tales gleaned from the manor's scullery maid. "Fled Madrid, she did," Mrs. Baxter declared, wiping a glass with unnecessary vigour. "After Don Carlos dropped dead. Heart attack, they said. But mark my words, there was poison in the air. Creditors nipping at her heels, and that treasure hidden away, or so the Spanish papers claimed. Jewels worth a king's ransom, smuggled out under the noses of the authorities." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her ears attuned to the nuances. The villagers embroidered the story with relish. Don Carlos, a merchant with fingers in dubious pies, art dealings perhaps, or something shadier involving antiquities. Beatrice, his second wife, had inherited everything, leaving his son Raphael bitter and his protégée, Señorita Vega, out in the cold. Miss Marple noted how the tales shifted with each telling. One moment Beatrice was a grieving widow, the next a cunning opportunist who had charmed her way into a fortune. Emboldened by a nod from Miss Marple, Mrs. Baxter lowered her voice. "And that dancer Vega, she was more than a pupil to Don Carlos. Lovers, some say, came here chasing what was promised her, a share of the spoils. Raphael's been sending telegrams to Spain, furious ones, about his inheritance being squandered on the parties like last night's. Miss Marple murmured her thanks and slipped away, her mind piecing together the fragments. She made her way to Hollow Manor under the pretext of returning a borrowed shawl, the gravel drive crunching beneath her sensible shoes. The house, still under police guard, felt subdued, its grandeur muted by yellow tape and the occasional flash of a constable's helmet. In the library, a room lined with leather-bound volumes and faded tapestries, she found Raphael Serrano alone, hunched over a sketch-pad. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing ink-stained forearms, and his face, shadowed by stubble, bore the marks of a sleepless night. He looked up, startled, then managed a wry smile. "Miss Marple, come to offer condolences? Or to snoop, like the rest?" "I prefer to think of it as curiosity," she replied mildly, settling into a wing chair. "Your stepmother's death must be a shock, despite your differences." Raphael's pencil scratched across the page, depicting a stormy Madrid skyline. "Shock? Relief, more like. She bled my father dry. His money, his legacy. That treasure wasn't just jewels. It was his life's work, tangled in debts and deals. She dangled it over me, promising shares if I played the dutiful son." His voice cracked, revealing a vulnerability beneath the anger. Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the sketchbook's margin, where a doodle of a crescent moon caught her attention. Bold lines, almost obsessive. "And Senorita Vega," she prompted gently. Raphael snorted. "Isabella, father's favourite. He taught her the flamenco, but it was business too, scouting artifacts in the markets. Beatrice hated her, saw her as a rival. If anyone had cause to stab her, it was Isabella, or me, or half of Madrid." Miss Marple thanked him and wandered to the conservatory, where a young constable allowed her a brief glimpse. The orange tree had been moved slightly, revealing the crescent moon tile more clearly, its edges worn as if frequently trod upon. She bent to examine a faint discoloration on the grout, perhaps a drop of wax from the phantom's envelopes, or something more telling. Later, in the rose garden, she encountered Senorita Vega, seated on a stone bench, her black shawl draped like morning wings. The dancer's eyes were red-rimmed, but her chin held high. "You are the English lady who sees everything," Vega said, her accent thick with emotion. "Ask your questions. I have nothing to hide." Miss Marple sat beside her. "Madrid must hold painful memories for you." Vega's laugh was bitter. "Painful? Don Carlos was my world. He promised me security, a studio, a future. Beatrice stole it all, waving papers she claimed were his will. But I know the truth. The ledger, hidden with the treasure, lists his real dealings, names, bribes, enough to ruin lives. She used it to blackmail, even here." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically. "And Dr. Vance, or Mr. Price?" Vega's gaze sharpened. The doctor owed money, gambling at cards. Beatrice lent it, then demanded silence. Price? He handled the legal twists, forging perhaps. Everyone danced to her tune. As dusk fell, Miss Marple sought out Dr. Vance in the village surgery, where he was packing instruments with trembling hands. "A dreadful business," he muttered, avoiding her eyes. "I examined the body. Death was quick, the dagger precise." "You were on the terrace," Miss Marple observed. "Did you see anyone?" Vance hesitated. "Shadows, perhaps. Beatrice had threatened to expose my debts to the medical board. But I didn't kill her. I'm no murderer." Clara Mortimer, encountered at the post office, was equally evasive. "Beatrice promised me a legacy," she sniffed, posting a letter with a Madrid stamp. "As a cousin, I deserved it. But she reneged, hinting at secrets in that ledger. If it surfaces, heads will roll." Miss Marple returned home as stars pricked the sky, her cottage lamp casting a warm glow. Over a simple supper of bread and cheese, she reflected on the shadows lengthening over St. Anne's Hollow. The crescent moon doodle, the ledger's mention, the precise stab, all pointed to knowledge, not mere greed. The past, she said to her cat who purred in agreement, has a way of catching up, especially when masked as treasure. That night, a knock at her door revealed Inspector Craddock, hat in hand. "Found this in the manor's rubbish bin," he said, producing a torn envelope fragment, its seal intact. "Crescent moon, like the others. But burned, someone tried to destroy it." Miss Marple examined it closely. "Not destroyed, Inspector. Preserved, perhaps, for those who know where to look." Chapter 5. The Missing Envelope. The second morning after the murder at Hollow Manor dawned with a mist that clung to St. Anne's Hollow like a shroud, softening the edges of the villages that Kiao cottages and lending the church steeple an ethereal glow. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in a woolen shawl against the damp, sat in her parlour, her knitting idle as she reviewed the events of the masquerade in her mind. The village was restless, its pulse quickened by the tragedy, and Miss Marple, ever attuned to its rhythms, sensed the truth lay buried in the details of that fateful night. Inspector Craddock arrived at her cottage shortly after breakfast, his face etched with the weary determination of a man wrestling with a puzzle. "Miss Marple," he said, removing his hat, "I've called the suspects back to the manor this afternoon. The missing envelope troubles me. It's the key, I'm sure of it." His voice held a note of respect, tempered by frustration, for he knew her knack for uncovering what had others overlooked. "Indeed," she replied, offering him tea. "The Phantom's game was no mere entertainment, I think. That envelope held something Lady Beatrice's killer could not afford to leave behind." Craddock nodded, producing a small evidence bag containing the torn fragment of an envelope, its crescent moon and dagger seal partially charred. "Found in the rubbish bin, as I told you. Someone tried to burn it, but the fire didn't take." Miss Marple examined the fragment, her fingers tracing the seal. "Curious," she murmured. "The wax is intact, yet the paper is torn. Someone was hasty or interrupted." At Hollow Manor that afternoon, the suspects gathered in the drawing-room, their faces a gallery of unease. Raphael Serrano sat slouched in a corner, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. Clara Mortimer, her grey dress now adorned with a sapphire brooch, perched stiffly on a sofa, her lips pursed. Dr. Hugo Vance stood by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, while Senorita Isabella Vega paced near the window, her black dress absorbing the light. Mr. Leonard Price, his satchel now conspicuously absent, fidgeted in a chair, his eyes darting to the door. Craddock began with the coroner's report. Lady Beatrice died instantly, the dagger piercing her heart with surgical precision. No fingerprints, no struggle. The killer knew exactly what they were doing. He held up the burned envelope fragment. "This was hers, we believe. Why destroy it? What did it contain?" The room stirred. Clara's brooch gleamed as she leaned forward. "A riddle, like the rest of us, received nothing more." Her tone was sharp, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. Miss Marple, seated quietly with her knitting, spoke softly. "Perhaps, Miss Mortimer, it held a truth someone feared. I suggest we revisit the conservatory. The scene of a crime often speaks when questioned closely." Craddock, accustomed to her suggestions, led the group to the conservatory, where the orange tree stood sentinel over the crescent moon tile. Miss Marple knelt, her knees creaking slightly, and examined the tile's grout, noting the faint wax discoloration she had seen before. "This tile," she said, "is not as innocent as it seems. The shadow of the tree falls here at midnight, does it not? And the riddle? The treasure lies where the shadow falls." Craddock frowned. "A decorative tile, nothing more. The treasure's a myth." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Myths, Inspector, often hide truths. Might we lift it?" A constable pried the tile loose, revealing a shallow cavity beneath, empty save for a dusting of earth. Craddock's brow furrowed. "Nothing, a dead end. Perhaps," Miss Marple said, "but an empty hiding place tells its own story. Someone reached it first." Back in the drawing room, Miss Marple's gaze fell on Mr. Price, whose hands trembled as he sipped water. "Mr. Price," she said gently, "your satchel was fuller last night, was it not? Papers, perhaps, or an envelope?" Price choked on his water, his face reddening. I told the inspector, just legal documents, nothing to do with this." Clara snorted. "He's hiding something, always clutching that bag like a lifeline." Price's eyes widened. "I'm a solicitor. I carry contracts, that's all." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "Yet the satchel was empty this morning. Did you dispose of something, Mr. Price?" Craddock seized the moment, demanding the satchel. Price, trembling, produced it from a corner now bulging once more. Inside, among innocuous papers, was an envelope bearing the crescent moon seal, unopened but crumpled. "I found it," Price stammered. "In the study, after the murder. I thought it was mine, but I panicked." Craddock opened the envelope, revealing a note in Beatrice's hand. "The ledger lies beneath the moon. Price knows." The room fell silent, all eyes on the solicitor. "I didn't kill her," Price cried. "She asked me to verify the ledger's hiding place, but I never saw it. She was blackmailing me, some old financial errors. I took the envelope to protect myself, but I swear I didn't touch her." Miss Marple's voice was calm. "The ledger, Mr. Price, what was in it?" Price slumped. "Don Carlos's dealings, names, bribes, stolen artifacts. Beatrice used it to control people. I don't know where it is now." That evening, Miss Marple invited Mrs. Clement to tea. The vicarage's warmth, a contrast to the manor's chill. Over scones, she shared her thoughts. "The ledger is the key, Eleanor, not jewels. Beatrice held power over many, Price, Vance, perhaps others. The envelope's note proves it." Mrs. Clement gasped. "But who took it?" Miss Marple's needles paused. "Someone who knew its value. I recall Dr. Vance digging in the churchyard the night of the ball. Mrs. Baxter mentioned it, though Craddock hasn't followed up." Mrs. Clement's eyes widened. "Digging? For the ledger?" "Possibly," Miss Marple said, "or to hide something else. The conservatory's empty cavity suggests the ledger was moved recently." As Mrs. Clement chattered about village suspicions, Miss Marple's mind turned to the crescent moon tile, the burned envelope, and Vance's nervous demeanour. "Fear," she murmured, "makes people careless, and carelessness leaves traces." Chapter 6. The Phantom's Secret. The mist of St. Anne's Hollow had lifted by the third morning, leaving the village bathed in a crisp autumn light that gilded the rooftops and sparkled on the dew-laden cobwebs. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl draped over her shoulders, sat in her garden, pruning her roses with a care that belied the whirl of her thoughts. The murder at Hollow Manor had cast a long shadow, and the discovery of the envelope in Mr. Price's satchel, with its cryptic note, "The ledger lies beneath the moon, Price knows," had shifted the investigation toward a truth more dangerous than mere treasure. Miss Marple's mind turned to the crescent moon tile, the burned envelope fragment, and Dr. Vance's nocturnal digging, each a thread in a tapestry of deceit. Inspector Craddock, ever punctual, arrived at her cottage with a request. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice tinged with reluctant admiration, "I'd value your presence at the churchyard. Mrs. Clement mentioned Vance digging there the night of the ball. If there's evidence, we need to find it." Miss Marple set aside her pruning shears, her eyes bright. "A churchyard at midnight is an odd place for a physician, Inspector. Let us see what secrets it holds." The churchyard, bordered by ancient yews and weathered gravestones, was silent save for the rustle of leaves. Craddock led her to a spot beneath a gnarled yew tree, where the earth was subtly disturbed, as if a spade had grazed it. A constable, summoned to dig, unearthed nothing but damp soil and a broken shard of pottery, its glaze faded but bearing a faint crescent moon design. Craddock frowned, tossing the shard aside. Another dead end? Miss Marple retrieved the shard, turning it in her gloved hands. "Not quite, Inspector. This pottery matches the manor's collection. Spanish, I believe. It suggests someone hid something here, or meant to." Back at her cottage, Miss Marple pondered the shard's significance. The crescent moon motif, recurring in the tile, the envelopes, and now this fragment, was no coincidence. She recalled Señorita Vega's mention of the Aguirre ledger, a record of Don Carlos's illicit dealings, potent enough to ruin lives. Beatrice's blackmail had ensnared Price and Vance, but who else had she threatened? And why was the ledger's hiding place so elusive? Determined to probe further, Miss Marple requested a private word with Señorita Vega, whom she found in the manor's music room, practicing a slow, mournful fandango on a guitar. The dancer's black dress seemed to absorb the sunlight, her face a mask of guarded sorrow. "You see too much, old lady," Vega said, her fingers pausing on the strings. "What do you want?" Miss Marple settled into a chair. Her knitting resumed at a soothing rhythm. "The truth, Señorita. You spoke of a ledger, one Don Carlos entrusted to you. What did it contain, and why did Beatrice fear it?" Vega's eyes flashed, but her voice softened. Don Carlos was no saint. He dealt in antiquities, some stolen, some forged. The ledger names his partners, politicians, dealers, even a priest in Madrid. Beatrice found it after his death, hidden in a false-bottomed chest. She used it to bend people to her will, Price for his shady accounts, Vance for his debts, even Clara, who wanted a share of the estate. I begged her to destroy it, but she laughed, saying it was her power. "And its hiding place?" Miss Marple asked gently. Vega hesitated. "Beneath the moon," she said once, mocking me. "I thought it was the conservatory, but I never found it." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking. "And the night of the ball? You were adjusting your costume, you said." Vega's gaze dropped. "I was in the guest room, alone, I swear it." Leaving Vega, Miss Marple sought out Craddock, who was re-examining the dagger in the manor's study. The jewelled weapon, now in an evidence bag, gleamed under the lamplight, its crescent moon hilt intricate and heavy. "Inspector," she said, "might we inspect the hilt closely? Such daggers often have secrets of their own." Craddock, sceptical but compliant, handed her a magnifying glass. Miss Marple's deft fingers probed the hilt, finding a tiny seam. With a gentle twist, a compartment sprang open, revealing a folded note in Beatrice's precise hand. "The ledger is safe. Vega suspects." Craddock's eyes widened. She knew someone was after it. Miss Marple's voice was calm. "Indeed, and this note suggests Vega was closer to the truth than Beatrice realized." That evening, Miss Marple visited the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement was arranging flowers for the church. Over tea, she shared the day's findings. "The ledger is the heart of this Eleanor," she said. "Beatrice used it to control her circle, but someone feared its exposure enough to kill her. The churchyard shard, the conservatory tile. Someone searched those places, perhaps in desperation." Mrs. Clement shivered. "But who, Jane? Vega. She's so passionate, so wronged." "Passion," Miss Marple mused, "is a powerful motive, but so is fear. Dr. Vance's digging, Price's hidden envelope, Clara's insistence on her legacy, all point to the ledger's shadow." As she walked home, the village quiet under a starlit sky, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the phantom's game. The envelopes, the crescent moon symbols, the empty hiding places, all suggested a killer who knew Beatrice's secrets intimately. She recalled a detail from the ball. Raphael's napkin sketch, not of Madrid, but of a dagger, its hilt unmistakable. Had he known of the compartment, or was it mere coincidence? In her parlour, Miss Marple lit a lamp and examined her own envelope's riddle again. The treasure lies where the shadow falls. The ledger, she realized, was the true treasure, and its shadow had fallen over every suspect. "Secrets," she murmured to her cat, who blinked sleepily, "are like shadows. They follow you, even when you think you've outrun them." Chapter 7. The Unmasking. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across St. Anne's Hollow, gilding the stone walls of Hollow Manor, as if to soften the grim purpose of the gathering within. In the drawing-room, where chandeliers hung silent, and the air held the faint scent of wilted lilies, Miss Jane Marple stood before the assembled suspects, her slight figure commanding a quiet authority. Her pale blue shawl draped over her shoulders, and her knitting lay folded in a basket, its needles still, as if the final stitch of the mystery were about to be set. Inspector Craddock, his notebook tucked away, stood beside her, his moustache twitching with anticipation. The suspects, Raphael Serrano, Clara Mortimer, Dr. Hugo Vance, Senorita Isabella Vega, and Mr. Leonard Price, sat in a tense semicircle, their faces a mosaic of apprehension and defiance. "Lady Beatrice Serrano's murder," Miss Marple began, her voice soft but clear, "was not a crime of passion or greed, but of fear. Fear of a secret so potent it drove someone to kill." The Phantom's game, with its cryptic envelopes, was no mere diversion. It was Beatrice's taunt, a way to flaunt her power over those she controlled with a ledger of Don Carlos's illicit dealings. She paused, her eyes sweeping the room. Raphael slouched in his chair, his fingers stained with charcoal. Clara clutched her sapphire brooch, her lips tight. Dr. Vance's hands trembled, his cigarette case forgotten. Senorita Vega stood rigid, her dark eyes unyielding. Mr. Price, his satchel absent, sat hunched as if bracing for a blow. "The ledger," Miss Marple continued, "named powerful men, dealers, politicians, even a priest, tied to Don Carlos's trade in stolen antiquities. Beatrice used it to blackmail her circle. Mr. Price for his financial misdeeds, Dr. Vance for his gambling debts, Miss Mortimer for her claim to the estate. But the ledger's hiding place, beneath the moon proved elusive, leading to desperate searches in the conservatory and churchyard. Craddock nodded, producing the jewelled dagger, its crescent moon hilt gleaming. "This was the key," he said. A note hidden in its compartment read, "The ledger is safe. Vega suspects." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Indeed, but let us begin with the night of the ball." The Phantom's game distributed envelopes, each with a riddle. Beatrice's was missing, but Mr. Price found it in the study and hid it, fearing it exposed his own secrets. Price flinched, but she raised a hand. "You took it to protect yourself, Mr. Price, not to kill. Your panic was evident in your bulging satchel, but your hands are clean." Price exhaled, his shoulders sagging. "I swear it, Miss Marple. I only wanted to bury my past." She turned to Dr. Vance. "You, Doctor, were on the terrace, your cigarette case gleaming in the moonlight. Clara saw you there, confirming your alibi, though your fear of Beatrice's threats drove you to dig in the churchyard, searching for the ledger. You found only a pottery shard, a relic of Don Carlos's trade." Vance nodded, his voice hoarse. "She'd have ruined me, but I didn't touch her." Clara's eyes flashed. "And I was dancing, as I said. I wanted my share of the estate, but I'd never stoop to murder." Miss Marple's gaze softened. "Miss Mortimer, your ambition was clear, but your letter to Madrid, posted the day after, was a plea for legal help, not a confession. You sought the ledger to secure your claim, not to destroy it." Clara's brooch glinted as she nodded, relief flickering across her face. "Raphael," Miss Marple said, turning to the artist, "your resentment of Beatrice was no secret. Your sketches, first of Madrid, then of the dagger's hilt, suggested you knew more than you admitted. But your grief for your father, evident in your stormy sketches, was genuine. You searched for the ledger to reclaim his legacy, not to kill." Raphael's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, his eyes dropping to his hands. Miss Marple's gaze settled on Señorita Vega, who stood like a statue, her black dress stark against the room's faded opulence. "Señorita Vega, you were Don Carlos's protégée, perhaps more. You knew the ledger's power, its list of names that could ruin lives. Beatrice mocked you, dangling its hiding place beneath the moon. You danced near her all evening, watching her every move. When the lights dimmed for the Phantom's game, you followed her to the conservatory, where she checked the crescent moon tile, believing the ledger was still there." Vega's lips parted, but Miss Marple continued, her voice steady. "The tile was empty, but Beatrice's note in the dagger's hilt confirmed your suspicions. You stabbed her with the very weapon she cherished, a symbol of her control. The strike was precise, learned perhaps from your years in Madrid's rougher quarters. You took her envelope, hoping it named the ledger's new hiding place, but found only a riddle. You burned the fragment to cover your tracks, but the wax seal survived." Vega's composure cracked, her hands clenching. "She destroyed him," she whispered, tears welling. "Don Carlos loved me, promised me a future. Beatrice stole it, mocked me with that ledger. I wanted justice." Craddock stepped forward, his voice firm. "Señorita Vega, you're under arrest for the murder of Lady Beatrice Serrano." As Vega was led away, her head high despite her tears, the room exhaled. Clara dabbed her eyes. Vance lit a cigarette with shaking hands, and Raphael stared at the floor. Price muttered thanks, his relief palpable. Miss Marple gathered her shawl and basket, her work done. Later, at the vicarage, she sipped tea with Mrs. Clement, who was agog with questions. "Jane, how did you know it was Vega?" "The crescent moon," Miss Marple said softly. "It was everywhere, tile, hilt, seal. Vega knew its significance, tied to Don Carlos's secrets. Her passion, her precision, her presence near the conservatory all pointed to her. The ledger, I suspect, is still hidden, perhaps in Madrid. But it was the fear of its exposure that killed Beatrice." Mrs. Clement shivered. "And the phantom's game?" "A distraction," Miss Marple said, her needles resuming their rhythm. "But distractions reveal truths, Eleanor. People hide behind masks, but their motives always show through." As she walked home under the starlit sky, St. Anne's Hollow settling into its quiet routine, Miss Marple reflected on the ledger's shadow. Secrets, like roses, needed pruning to reveal their true shape. In her parlour, she resumed her knitting, the pale blue shawl growing under her deft hands, a quiet testament to order restored.